So this is Memes, Universal Acid, or Better Mouse Trap by Robert Boyd and Peter J. Richardson out of UC, out of the University of California system. Looks like Davis in LA. And this was given for presentation of a conference on memes held at Cambridge University in 1999. Do not quote or cite without permission. So yeah, this is this looks like an old talk that was given by professional philosophers, or like these are population biology and Department of Anthropology. So these are not philosophers. This is going to be, I guess, a philosophical analysis though. What's up, Squizzy? But yeah, so we'll see what this is. As always, my first time reading it. Feel free to ask questions. I will try to answer the best I can. I am a professional, somewhat philosopher. I write professional philosophy. Although I am so fucking pissed off at reviewers at the moment. It's like every time this shit happens where the reviewer is just like so bad, I'm like, why do I bother? Why do I bother? I don't know. Anyway, Unreal says, before the meme meant what it does today. I mean, I know most of you are old enough to remember the 90s. We had memes back then too, because that was early days of the internet, but like, you know, they were different, but we still had some of them. So we'll see. Yeah. Okay, here we go. Among the many vivid metaphors in Darwin's dangerous idea, one stands out. The understanding of how cumulative natural selection gives rise to adaptation is, Dennett says, like a universal acid, an idea so powerful and corrosive of conventional wisdom that it dissolves all attempts to contain it within biology. Like most good ideas, this one is very simple. Once replicators, material objects that are faithfully copied, come to exist, some will replicate more rapidly than others, leading to adaptation by natural selection. The great power of the idea is that the resulting adaptations can be understood by asking what leads to efficient, rapid replication. Given that ideas seem to replicate, it is natural that Dawkins, Dennett, and others have explored the possibility of using this idea to explain cultural evolution. Unreal says, it originally comes from Richard Dawkins' selfish gene to refer to self-reproduction elements of culture. Yeah, and that's exactly right. And that's what they were just saying right up here. So, like, yeah, that's right. That's where we're starting off the old thing. All your base are belong to us. Exactly. We've got old memes, and thank you, System Max, for coming out of lurk to say that. I appreciate it. But, I mean, is the current understanding of memes so different than the old one, where it was basically you've got these cultural things that would spread within the population and would replicate for whatever reason? It's like we're not that far away from it. Natural selection wasn't Darwin's only powerful, far-reaching idea. Ernst Mayr has argued that was what he called population thinking was also among Darwin's foundational contributions to biology. Before Darwin, species were thought to be essential, unchanging types like geometric figures and chemical elements. Darwin saw that species were populations of organisms that carried a variable pool of inherited information through time. Yeah, and you have to remember, Darwin did not have genetics. He was hypothesizing that they had some sort of genetic or some inherited characteristics, but it was not the kind of thing he was thinking. It's like we didn't know, or he didn't know. So the inherited information is already projecting modern terms back onto Darwin. You got to be careful about that. Unreal says current is just a very specific form, whereas Dawkins was talking about things like religious beliefs or the idea of rights, etc. Well, that's fair. I mean, the way we use it is limited to like the things we see on the internet now. But I mean, to be fair, all the stuff we talk about, like Diogenes, like going, like the idea of like him going to the market with a light, looking for a man, and then going to through Nietzsche, like going to the market, like looking for, like proclaiming God is dead. These are ideas that have like stayed through time. Granted, we have a lot more short-lived memes now, but how different are they really? These old ideas versus the new ones. To repeat, meme is a unit of thought, not a unit of lull. But I mean, a lull is a kind of thought. So I guess it's very specific the way we're using it now, but I don't see it as like a non-thought. So maybe it's just, you know, the current usage is more specific, but I still have it kind of within the grand sort of, it still fits. The color of blue is a meme, the letter H is a meme, your mom is a meme, the world's a meme, my mother is a meme met. Yes. Just got here after an appointment. Sounds like you're having a paper review of frustration. Sorry about that. No, not yet. Not yet. We just started is what happened. And we're trying to get into this. Just trying to see, like, because we're trying to figure out, like, this is from 1999. Do we even agree with, like, our terminology from today, from 1999? You found an online Santayana reading group to join, so you're happy about that. Congratulations, Unreal Brian. That would be very cool. My dad got me a George Santayana book when I was, like, in high school or something, because I've always been like this. And I didn't understand a goddamn thing, but, like, I tried reading it. I remember that book because, you know, it had the, you know, the plastic cover, and, like, you guys remember the old books that, like, the plastic would start to, like, peel back from the cover? I was like, yeah, it's whatever. Remember what it was, like, greenish, like a light green, and it was peeling back. Anyway, so where were we? Okay, so we've got this inherited information through time. To understand the evolution of species, biologists had to account for the processes that change the nature of that inherited information. Darwin thought that the most important processes were natural selection, sexual selection, and the inherited effect of use and disuse. We now know that the last process is not important in organic evolution. Unlike Darwin, modern biologists do not believe that the sons of blacksmiths inherit their father's mighty biceps. Nowadays, biologists think that many processes in Darwin never dreamed of are important, including segregation, recombination, gene conversion, and meiotic drive. Nonetheless, modern biology is fundamentally Darwinian because its explanations of evolution are rooted in population thinking, and if Darwin were to be resurrected tomorrow through some miracle of cloning, we think he would be quite happy with his legacy. I mean, this is fair, but, like, I think, again, they're reading too much back into the history here because of what Darwin knew at the time was before genetics. But, like, sure, Darwin would think all the modern science and stuff is cool. I can't see why he wouldn't. Is it claiming memes or anything is non-physical? Not yet, Chocolate Mints. This is sort of prehistory. Luminance, I've always been like this, Mark of Philosopher. I threw a tantrum when I was like 5 because I wanted a chair. I was in a department store and they had like a small chair that was like my size. And I wanted the chair so I could sit and think in it. And my parents didn't buy it for me. And I was angry because I didn't have my sit and thinking chair when I was 5 or something like that. So yeah, it was like a red chair. And my mom still brings it up. Well, she hasn't brought it up in years, but like they would bring it up like over the course of my life and stuff. Like, you remember you're throwing the tantrum about your red chair? I was like, yeah, I do. It's like, I wanted my thinking chair even back then. In this paper, we want to convince you that population thinking, not natural selection, is the key to conceptualizing culture in terms of material causes. This argument is based on 3 well-established facts. 1, there is persistent cultural variation among human groups. Any explanation of human behavior must account for how this variation arises and how it is maintained. 2, culture is information stored in human brains. Every human culture contains vast amounts of information. Important components of this information are stored in human brains. I have a little bit of a problem with this. Human culture is contained in our brains and our behaviors, but like the idea of it's like contained in our brains, like we have just like a memory bank and it's like human culture is there. That's not the way I like to think about human brains. And secondly, it's only partially contained in human brains. I know they didn't make a claim that it's only contained in human brains, but you have to be clear here. Like there's cultural artifacts all over the place in our world, and how we interact with them is cultural, but like the artifacts exist too, and they are not in our brains. Brains don't really store info, it builds connections. Yeah, so this is why I bring it up exactly, K-Pars, is that this is going to be a little bit, like they may not be wrong, but you have to be careful here. Components of this, yeah. Extended cognition is a thing. Yeah, it's exactly where I was going. So there's gonna be like, they're setting up this discussion in a certain way to make it work out for them because they want to, like, you know, I mean, you should be able to, well, at least I can see, maybe you can see too. Like, look what they're doing. They're setting up the standard evolutionary story to talk about memes, just they're doing it in this population dynamics human system. Like, that's what they're doing. It's like, this is just what you need. Like, these are the, I mean, I'm the sort of person, I know the three tenets of Darwinian evolution off the top of my head. First is inheritance. Offspring get inherited characteristics from their parents. 2 is variation. They get the characteristics, but they're not exactly identical. And 3 is fitness, that the variations matter in the course of their lives. And that is, of course, a statistical measure over the population, not individual, because you can get hit by lightning, and they don't want to just be like, well, you were weak because you were hit by lightning. No, they want to say, on average, people with the better genes live. So it's not individually specified, it's population specified, but that's exactly what they're doing here. They're setting up this exact structure. All right, let's get to it. Culture is derived. So yeah, here's the culture is inherited, and then it's going to be variation, and then how it is, they're using this genetic, and so basically then they're going to say there's going to be some evolution on this. So that's how it goes. This is what the argument is. Culture is derived. The psychological mechanism that allowed culture to be transmitted arose in the course of hominid evolution. Culture is not simply a byproduct of intelligence and social life. Yeah, so they're making it like genetics. It's a result of evolution. Okay. Most culture is information stored in human brains, information that got into those brains by various mechanisms of social learning. Again, I do not like this philosophy of mind. Granted, this is 1999. The extended cognition was very young back then in terms of academic philosophy. It was started to pick up in the 90s, but you can't even fault these authors for not taking this, for being sort of one-sided here, because there really only still was one side in the literature at this point, sociology of philosophy of mind. Most people were not, extended mind was growing, but it was still very small in the 90s. Okay. It follows you can't fault them too bad that they weren't, that we might disagree on these points. It follows that to explain the distribution of information stored in the brains of the members of the current generation, any coherent theory will have to account for the cultural information in the brains of the previous generation. So we've got inheritance right here. From the previous generation, the cultural information's inherited. They're putting disclaimers in most culture. Yeah, they're being reasonably what's up, energy? They're being philosophical in that they're trying not to overstate their claim too badly. But this is of a time and place, of course. The theory will also have to explain how this information, together with genes and environmental contingencies, caused the present generation to acquire the cultural information that it did. Ultimately, we do not understand how this process works. It may be that the cultural information is stored in the brains takes the form of discrete memes that are replicated faithfully in each subsequent generation, or it may not. This is an empirical question which at present is unanswered, and we will see that other models are possible. In every case, Darwinian population approach will illuminate the process by which the cultural information that is stored in a population of brains is transferred from one generation to the next. Yeah. So we'll see if they get into alternate theories, but it doesn't look like they are, but either way. We also want to convince you that the population thinking can play an important constructive role in human sciences. The fact that population thinking is logically necessary for a materialist theory of culture doesn't necessarily mean that such a theory will be useful. Yes, you see, and this is part of the problem here. The materialist theory of culture that they're talking kind of does depend on their setup earlier. And the extended mind folks might be less materialist. And that's part of the tension that went forward from these discussions. Okay, thus we know that human culture must be consistent with quantum mechanics, but it is unlikely that such a connection will help us understand, say, ethnic conflict. However, we think that Darwinian models of culture are useful for two reasons. First, they serve to connect the rich models of behavior based on individual actions developed in economics, psychology, and evolutionary biology with the data and insights of cultural sciences, anthropology, archaeology, and sociology. In doing so, we think that it can help shed light on important unsolved problems in the social sciences. Second, population thinking is useful because it offers a way to build a mathematical theory of human behavior that captures the important role of culture in human affairs. Population thinking is not a universal acid that will dissolve existing social science, but it is a better mousetrap providing useful tools that can help solve outstanding problems in the human sciences. I mean, are they really just saying we should be looking at statistics? Because, like, okay. Culture is heritable at the group level. Yeah, again, so you need heritability for Darwinian evolution. So this is just hitting the first tenet of Darwinian evolution. Remember, heritability, variation, and that the variations matter, which is called differential fitness. Those are the three things you need for classic Darwinian evolution. One of the striking facts about the human species is that there are important, persistent differences between human groups that are created by culturally transmitted ideas, not genetic differences or differences in the physical or biotic environment. Sonia Salomon, research on immigrant communities in the U.S. show how cultural differences can give rise to different behaviors in the same environment. For example, one of Salomon's studies focused on 2 farming communities in southern Illinois. Freiburg, a pseudonym, is inhabited by the descendants of German Catholic immigrants who arrived in the area in the 1840s. Libertyville, also a pseudonym, was settled by people from other parts of the U.S., mainly Kentucky, Ohio, and Indiana, when the railroad arrived in the 1870s. These 2 communities are only about 20 miles apart and have been carefully matched for similar soil types. Energy says, I haven't read it, so take this with a grain of salt, but the only person I've ever heard who's done research on memes from a Darwinian perspective is the English biologist Dawkins, who to Energy's understanding, proposed traits are evolved. Yeah, so they referenced Dawkins earlier. Like, they started off with a quote. So yeah, that's like the prehistory on this. Like, they were looking at the Dawkins and then they're saying, look, this is going to be useful for some more social science going forward. Yeah. At first I read that as they're putting dulcimers in, which seemed weird. Yeah, that is, well, that would be odd. The people in these 2 communities have different values about family, property, and farm practice, and these differences seem consistent with their ethnic origins. The farmers of Freiburg tend to value farming as a way of life, and they want at least one son or daughter to continue as farmers. In Freiburg, wills specify that the farm will go to a child who will farm the land and use farm proceeds to buy out any non-farming siblings. Parents put considerable pressure on children to become farmers, but place little importance on education. Yeah, see, now it's Salomon. Salomon argues that these yeoman values are similar to those observed among peasant farmers in Europe and elsewhere. In contrast, the Yankee farmers of Libertyville regard the farms as profit-making businesses. They buy or rent land depending on economic conditions, and if the price is right, they sell. Many Yankee farmers would prefer their children to continue farming, but they see it as an individual decision. Some families help their children enter farming, many do not, and they generally place a strong value on education. The difference in values between Freiburg and Libertyville tend to lead to measurable differences in farm practices, despite the proximity of the 2 towns and the similarity of their soils. Farms are substantially larger in Libertyville. The mean size of farm operations in Libertyville is 518 acres compared to 276 acres in Freiburg. The Libertyville farms are larger because Yankee farmers rent more land. The 2 communities also show striking differences in farm operations. In Libertyville, as in most of southern Illinois, farmers specialize in grain production. It is the primary source of income for 77% of the farmers in Libertyville. In Freiburg, many people mix grain production with dairying or livestock raising, activities that are almost absent in Libertyville. Because animal operations are labor intensive, they allow Germans to accommodate their larger families on the more limited acreage. Yankee farmers decide against dairying and stock raising because grain farming is more profitable and less work. The fact that culturally distinctive human groups behave differently in the same environment implies that culture is inheritable, at least at the group level. Many beliefs and values that are common in a group at one point in time are also common among the descendants of the same group. Any theory of how culture works must be consistent with this fact. It must explain why the German farmers of Freiburg hold different beliefs about life and land than their Yankee neighbors almost 150 years after leaving Europe. Okay, so we've got inheritance of cultural traits. Sure. Culture is information stored in human brains. Now, this is, like I said, I'm already very skeptical of this sort of claim, but they're going to need this because you need a carrier of the information. Like, we have genetics, and then so now we're going to for biological evolution. And so what they're going to do is they're going to use brain stuff as the carrier of cultural evolution. Of course, like I was saying earlier, there's cultural artifacts which exist outside the body, which also can carry stuff. Like, like sheet music. Like, we were talking about this a few streams ago, but sheet music and writing music, and like Luminance was talking about this on his poetry streams. The idea that music can be written down and transmitted in this way, I mean, that exists. Like, if anyone who can read the music can take some of the culture with them. Viper says, this is admittedly way more elementary than I hoped, based on corrosive conventional wisdom that dissolves all attempts to contain it within biology. I was hoping they'd be talking more about how certain memes can override the genetic imperative. They may get there. This is really the first few pages. I also agree that, like, this is very, giving a talk to a general audience style. But, they may make some claims later. We will find out. They've got a long way to go. I mean, we've got another 10 pages, basically. So we'll find out. But again, this may also just be making the case to study population level cultures in this way, or cultures at the population level. Every human culture contains an enormous amount of information. Consider how much information must be transmitted to maintain a particular distinctive spoken language. A lexicon requires something like 10,000 associations between words and their meanings. Grammar entails a complex set of rules regulating morphosyntax, and although the extent to which these rules arise from innate genetically transmitted structures, it is clear that the rules that underlie grammatical differences that separate English and Chinese are culturally transmitted. Subsistence techniques also entail large amounts of information. For example, Blurton, Jones, and Connor showed that the Kung-san, I'm sorry, I can't do the click of the Kung, but you can, I don't know if you can see it, but it's they have the exclamation point for the click. Have a very detailed knowledge of the natural history of the Kalahari, so detailed in fact that the researchers were unable to judge the accuracy of much of the Kung knowledge because it exceeded that of Western biology. As anyone who has ever tried to make a decent stone tool can attest, the manufacture of even the simplest tool requires lots of knowledge. More complex technology requires even more. Imagine the instruction manual for constructing a seaworthy kayak from materials available on the north slope of Alaska. The institutions that regulate social interactions incorporate still more information. Property rights, religious customs, roles, and obligations all require a considerable amount of detailed information. The vast store of information that exists in every culture cannot simply float in the air. It must be encoded in some material object. In societies without widespread literacy, the only objects in the environment capable of storing this information are human brains and human genes. It is undoubtedly true that some cultural information is stored in artifacts. It may well be that the designs that are used to decorate pots are stored on the pots themselves, and that when young potters learn to make pots, they use old pots, not old potters, as models. In the same way, the architecture of the church may help store information about the rituals performed within. Without writing, however, the ability of artifacts to store culture is quite limited. First, many artifacts are very difficult to reverse engineer. The young potter cannot learn how to select clay and temper, or how to fire a pot by studying existing ones. Second, much cultural information is semantic knowledge. How can an artifact store the notion that the Kalahari porcupines are monogamous, or the rules that govern bride price transactions? Unreal says, the last chapter of the Selfish Genes where Dawkins talks about memes. It's worth reading. The whole book is worth reading and thinking about, even if you think Dawkins is a big jerk these days, which he is. I actually read it a long time ago, so yeah, it was interesting. But I mean, I spent a lot of time actually a long time ago thinking about the causal structure of evolution. I actually have old work on the topic, which I don't touch anymore, but which is actually the best thing I ever wrote. So like, yeah, I read all that stuff. I know about that. I've got like actual serious problems, like technical philosophical ones about what he said about that, but it is very interesting stuff. K-Par says also Sacred Sites painting. Yeah, like I said, they are light on the artifacts and the amount of information that can be stored in other places besides human brains, but like they at least recognize that it's not all stored within our heads. Of course, they are free to like point out, as they do, that the notion that like porcupines are monogamous. I have no idea if they are, but if they are, and people know that, they probably, you're not seeing that in paintings. But like, yeah. Chocolate says digital preservation might reduce variation, not necessarily electronic. Yeah. The idea that like we can store things digitally and very accurately might change some of the way that culture is transmitted. But then again, we also have huge, vast, unbelievably large amounts of information we're producing nowadays. So it's not that we're storing exact information, but we're also producing tons of it. So the idea that we can recall the exact same information is not exactly so clear. Like, you might be able to search for certain information, but like that you're gonna get the same thing every time because there's just so much information being produced. Like, it's there's gonna be new problems with all of this. Like, yeah, people are saying, oh, we're preserving everything so perfectly, but like, yeah, we've also got 17 versions of it now. It's like, so something else is, like, a lot of weird shit's happening now. It is also clear that much cultural information is not stored in human genes. In one sense, this is obvious. The evidence is very clear that very little cultural variation results from genetic differences. We know that genetic differences do not explain why some people speak Chinese and other English, or why the Kung know a lot more about the biology of porcupines than most readers of this paper. Cultural GitHub. Yeah. Viper says, we created a perfect distribution information store and now we're ruining it with hallucinating predictive text algorithm. Yeah. I mean, did you, like, this is one of those funny things. It's like, people were so idealistic about the internet. It's like, did you really think, knowing people as we do now, that it was going to last? We were so hopeful. And now everything's like inshitifying and dead internet. It's like, yeah, they need version control. Well, I mean, that's also part of it. Like, even with like good version control, we've just got so much information nowadays that sorting through it is a whole nother problem. And that's part of the issue. Like Viper's mentioned, we've got predictive text and like artificial intelligence search, because we're trying to sort through so much of it that it's hard. And so we're doing these shortcuts, these heuristics, and it's not working as expected. You know, it's working well for what it does, but it's not working as expected what we want. And that's trouble, like when things are not acting as we want. One of the principles, I actually really like it. I think this comes out of computer science. Back when I was like watching like computer-y stuff podcasts, there's a guy named Alan Jude who's in the BSD community, for all you nerds out there. And he said he learned this thing called the principle of least surprise. Polls, principle of least surprise. He says, when you're programming a computer, you want everything, if it's going to break, you want to break in the least surprising way. Everything should act in the least surprising way. So when you have to go analyze it, you'd be like, everything makes sense when you go back and look at it. Or if something breaks, you understand what broke, because everything else is like, if it does something surprising, you want to figure out what it was as fast as possible. And so this is the same thing. It's like, you want, like, I drive in this way. I drive to be completely unsurprising to the other drivers in order that, like, you don't surprise them and something stupid happens. But this also happens, like, in this algorithmic search. You want it to be boring, return the search results. You don't want it hallucinating, and that's why it's a real problem, because computers up until this point were basically trying to like give you unsurprising results. They're trying to give you what you ask for, and now it's not doing that anymore, and it's fucking with everything. It was all worth it for Twitch philosophy in the end. Was it, Luminance? Really? Was it? I've been doing this for 5.5 years now, since the March of 2020. We'll see. I mean, we'll find out. Okay. Continuing. However, there is a subtle and much more plausible way that genes could store cultural information. It could be that most human culture is innate, genetically transmitted information that is evoked by the environmental cues. Pascal Boyer argues that much religious belief has this character. For example, the Fang, a group of Cameroon studied by Boyer, have elaborate beliefs about ghosts. For the Fang, ghosts are malevolent beings that want to harm the living, they're invisible and can pass through solid objects, and so on. Boyer argues that most of what the Fang believe about ghosts is not transmitted, but rather it is based on the innate epistemological assumptions that underlie all cognition. I mean, this is some fucking bullshit, if I ever heard it, but okay. Like, what the fuck? Like, the innate epistemological assumptions that underlie all cognition. Like, okay, I'm an epistemologist. What do you fucking think epistemology is, my friend? It's probably not what you think. Once a young Fang child learns that ghosts are sentient beings, she does not need to learn that ghosts can see or that they have beliefs and desires. These components are provided by cognitive machinery that reliably develop in every environment. Okay, this is just like absolute nonsense. I mean, the idea that like this isn't logically derivable from certain other concepts, like, oh, it's smart like me, it can do the things like me, and then like in that case it can see and hear. Okay, but like that's genetically based. Well, maybe you can argue that logic has something going on in our brains and stuff, but like the idea that these specific inferences are going to follow, no fucking way. You need a lot of background information to make that work. So I mean, this is this is not what I would say philosophically rigorous right here. According to this view, cultural differences arise because different environmental cues evoke different innate information. My neighbor believes in angels instead of ghosts because he grew up in an environment in which people talked about angels. However, most of what he knows about angels comes from the same cognitive machinery that gives rise to Fang beliefs about ghosts, and the information that controls the development of this machinery is stored in the genome. Yeah, this is just garbage, is my opinion, but okay. Garbage. Bad, bad, bad. This picture of culture is a useful antidote to the simplistic view that culture is simply poured from one head into another. Evolutionary psychologists are surely right that every form of learning, including social learning, requires an information-rich innate psychology, and that much of the adaptive complexity we see in cultures around the world stems from this information. However, it is a big mistake to ignore transmitted cultural information. The single most important adaptive feature of culture is that it allows the gradual cumulative assembly of adaptations over many generations, adaptations that no single individual could invent on their own. Cumulative adaptation cannot be based on innate genetically encoded information. Simple is good, but like, yeah, this is they were bringing it up because they don't want to only rely on genetics. So it's like they didn't do like they said something dumb, but then they said something dumb basically because they want to get away from that. So it's like not terrible, but it's just not good, because really what they wanted to get was this result here. Cumulative adaptation cannot be based on that innate stuff on its own. Consider the evolution of a relatively simple form of technology, the mariner's magnetic compass. First, Chinese geomancers noticed the peculiar tendency of small magnetite objects to orient in the Earth's magnetic field, an effect that they used for purposes of divination. Then Chinese mariners learned that magnetized needles could be floated on water to indicate directions at sea. Next, over several centuries, Chinese seamen developed a dry compass mounted on a vertical pin bearing, like a modern toy compass. This type of compass was acquired by Europeans in the late medieval period. European seamen developed the card compass, which allowed a helmsman to steer an accurate course by aligning the bow mark with the appropriate compass point. Compass markers later learned to adjust iron balls near the compass to zero out the magnetic influence from the ship and to gimbal the compass to damp the motion imparted to the card by the roll and pitch of the sea. Even such a relatively simple tool was the product of at least 7 or 8 innovations separated in time by centuries and in the space by the breadth of Eurasia. This sort of adaptation can only occur because novel information can accumulate in human populations, be stored in human brains, and be transmitted through time by teaching and imitation. He said seamen have iron balls. I did say that, or the author said that. Evolutionary psychologists argue that our psychology is built of complex, information-rich, evolved modules that are adapted for the hunting and gathering life that we pursued until the origins of agriculture a few thousand years ago. On this argument, humans can easily and naturally do the things we're really adapted to do, like learn a language or understand feelings of others. Inventing complex modern artifacts like the compass is hard, but what about the skills necessary for hunting and gathering? Couldn't we learn these as easily as we learn language? Doesn't our brain contain the information necessary to follow hunting and gathering ways? Our ancestors lived as hunter-gatherers of some kind for the last 2 to 3 million years. If we had to do so, couldn't we be able to reinvent that stuff just as Fang children invent the properties of their ghosts, or children can invent a grammar? Good questions, but we think the answer is almost certainly, are you nuts? Consider the following thought experiment. Suppose you are stranded in some not too extreme desert environment not the empty quarter of the Atacama, but the altered desert between Sonoita, Mexico, and Yuma, Arizona. Your task is to survive and to raise your kids without modern technology. You'll be given the resources to survive a few months to get your feet on the ground before we take away your last tin of food and your last steel tool. A little time to see what comes naturally. Will you make it? It is sort of use it or lose it. Yeah. But like, yeah, it's like either you record your cultural history or you don't. You teach it to people or you don't. It's not going to be genetic, but that's fair. And so, I mean, if you're stuck in the desert with your family and really very few resources, they say, are you going to make it? We don't think so. The stretch between Sonoita and Yuma used to be known as El Camino de Diablo, the Devil's Road, one leg of the main overland route from the old Mexico to California until the coming of the railroads. For more than a century, it was used by Spanish, Mexican, and American travelers. To get that far, every traveler had to already be an experienced frontiers person, and no doubt most were hard-bitten, desert-wise, and well-equipped with familiar technology. It was the best of several bad routes, and was comparatively well-known and well-marked. Still, it was an infamous leg of the journey, and many travelers ended up in hasty graves that litter the route. What's up, Koss? How you been? You like clean-faced? Yeah. Looks all snuggleable? I hope so. I hope so. Now consider the Camino del Diablo was also the home of Papago Indians who, with a few pounds of wood, stone, and bone equipment, an impressive amount of hard-won knowledge, and a well-adapted system of social institutions, lived and raised their children in the very same desert that killed so many pioneers. We don't know about you, but if our task was to get to Yuma via the Camino del Diablo without our accustomed to industrial technology, we trade a few hours of tutoring by a traditional Papago for any number of months of trying to summon an innate knowledge of the desert. Chocolate says, using is like knowing how, recording to writing is like knowing that. Yeah, that's part of what we were discussing earlier, and I think that's probably why Vipers chose this paper, is because we were discussing knowing how versus knowing that, the skill. And of course, the man to talk to about this is Prof. He works on this stuff. Yeah. So, this was all, even all the silly shit they said, was all to say, look, culture is basically going to be recorded by people explaining it to more people. That's how it's going to exist. It'll be in transmission through some sort of human technology to explain it to somebody else. They said some silly things along the way, but in the end, you know, the transmission of the culture is, in some sense, linguistic between people. Okay. Culture is derived. Culturally transmitted traditions occur in many other species of animals. In a review of social transmission and foraging behavior, Lafarbe and Palametta give 97 examples of cultural variation in foraging behavior in animals as diverse as baboons, sparrows, lizards, and fish. Much of the evidence for culture in other animals consists of observations of different behavior by populations of the same species living in similar environments. Yeah, and so you gotta, again, they're being real fucking light with the terminology here. They're saying different behaviors constitute culture because you've got different behaviors between different groups. You can define it as culture, but it's not going to be human culture. But again, you're talking about there are going to be different group behaviors, which is okay. For example, chimpanzees in the Mahale Mountains of Tanzania often adopt a unique grooming posture in which both partners extend one arm over their heads, clasp hands, and then groom one another's exposed armpits. These grooming hand clasps occur often and are performed by all members of the group. Chimpanzees at Gombe, who live less than 100 kilometers away in a similar type of habitat, groom often but never perform this behavior. Sometimes scientists have observed the spread of a novel behavior. One famous example comes from Japan, where a group of Japanese macaques, whose range includes a sandy beach, were provisioned with sweet potatoes. A young female macaque accidentally dropped her sweet potato into the sea as she was trying to rub sand off of it. She must have liked the results, and she began to carry all of her potatoes into the sea to wash them. Other monkeys followed suit. Monkey see, monkey do. However, it took other members of the group quite some time to acquire the behavior, and many monkeys never washed their potatoes. Finally, some evidence for culture in other animals comes from experiments which demonstrate that behavior is socially transmitted. The most famous case is the transmission of song dialects in birds like the white-crowned sparrow. There is little evidence, however, of cumulative cultural evolution in other species. With a few exceptions, social learning leads to the spread of behaviors that individuals could have learned on their own. For example, food preferences are socially transmitted in rats. Young rats acquire preference for food when they smell the food on the pelage of other rats. This process can cause the preference for a new food to spread within a population. It can also lead to behavioral differences among populations living in the same environment because current foraging behavior depends on a history of social learning. However, it does not lead to the cumulative evolution of complex new behaviors that no individual rat could learn on its own. Thus, in other animals, it is quite plausible that most of the detailed information that creates cultural differences is stored and transmitted genetically. Again, this genetic shit I think is nothing. But like they're saying, look, there's a limit to the cultural or behavioral information that can be transmitted. It's like, okay. Yeah. Yeah, this is a paper, so this guy here, Robert Boyd, these are, let me just actually scroll up on page 8. These are people out of, sorry, what did I do? These are people out of anthropology and population biology out of the University of California system. So these are not philosophers, although they are waxing philosophical about lots of stuff at the moment. So they're talking about memes and how they're culturally transmitted. So that overlaps with topics in philosophy. Okay, circumstantial evidence suggests that the ability to acquire novel behaviors by observation is essential for cumulative cultural change. Students of animal social learning distinguish observational learning, which occurs when younger animals observe the behavior of older animals and learn how to perform a novel behavior by watching them, from a number of other mechanisms of social transmission, which can also lead to behavioral continuity without observational learning. One such mechanism, local enhancement, occurs when the activity of older animals increases the chance that younger animals will learn behavior on their own. Imagine a young monkey acquiring its food preferences as it follows its mother around. Even if the young monkey never pays any attention to what the mother eats, she will lead it to the locations where some foods are common and others rare, and the young monkey may learn to eat much the same foods as mom. Local enhancement and observational learning are similar in that they can both lead to persistent behavioral differences among populations, but only observational learning allows cumulative cultural change. To see why, consider the cultural transmission of stone tool use. Suppose that occasionally early hominids learned to strike rocks together to make useful flakes. Their companions who spent time near them would be exposed to the same kinds of conditions, and some of them might learn to make flakes too entirely on their own. This behavior could be preserved by local enhancement because groups in which tools were used would spend more time in proximity to appropriate raw materials. However, that would be as far as it would go. Even if an especially talented individual found a way to improve the flakes, this innovation would not spread to other members of the group because each individual learned that behavior anew. Local enhancement is limited by the learning capabilities of individuals and the fact that each new learner must start from scratch. With observational learning, on the other hand, innovations can be incorporated into others' behavioral repertoires if younger individuals are able to acquire the modified behavior by observational learning. To the extent that observers can use the behavior of models as a starting point, observational learning can lead to the cumulative evolution of behaviors that no single individual could invent on their own. Yeah, and so now we have the variation within cultural understandings. They're saying once you can learn by not just being in proximity to the places where you figure stuff out, like in a puzzle room, basically. You learn by seeing how someone else does it. You can then do it yourself and then maybe do it better, like however you learn it. And then that is, now we have the variation and potentially even differential fitness where things get improved upon. Hey Frank, what's up? Have you considered that you might not find the genetic belief in ghost arguments convincing because you don't have the genes for believing in genetic beliefs? Yes, I have considered that. I still think it's shit. The way I think about stuff, I mean, just in general, is what would be an argument that ends with therefore there are ghosts, and that have these properties in this case. And there's a lot of ways to do it, actually. Ghosts are not very hard to come up with in terms of like just like any sort of reasoning. I mean, I know it's a joke, but like if you think about it, let me explain how I think about it. We understand about people. A lot of stuff happens without our doing anything. The idea that another person did something happened, or it could have happened by like some animal doing something. A lot of stuff just happens that is beyond like what I do myself. The idea that like something else did it and it wasn't a person, it's like that's not very hard to imagine at all. The idea that that's genetic is like weird to me. Like, why would you put that into genes that there's specifically ghosts? The idea that there's like specifically ghosts is just like, as opposed to just some other entity existent in the world that did it, it's like, okay, like that makes perfect sense. Like that just somebody else did it. And then we're going to say, well, they have different properties and they happen to be dead. Okay, that's a ghost. Whatever. Like, is a much simpler explanation. Like, it's way simpler to just say a person with different properties than us did it. Like, and there's plenty of animals around that do stuff too. So it's like, you don't need to like write it into the genes. You just need to be like, okay, person with different properties. And we're going to call that person a ghost. Easy. Okay. Adaptation by cumulative cultural evolution is apparently not a byproduct of intelligence and social life. Capuchin monkeys are among the world's cleverest creatures, in name performing many complex behaviors, and in captivity, in nature they perform many complex behaviors, and in captivity they can be taught extremely demanding tasks. Capuchins live in social groups and have ample opportunity to observe the behavior of other individuals of their own species, yet good laboratory evidence indicates that the monkeys make no use of observational learning. Observational learning is not simply a byproduct of intelligence and the opportunity to observe conspecifics. Rather, it seems to require special psychological mechanisms. This conclusion suggests that the psychological mechanisms that enable humans to learn by observation are adaptations that have been shaped by natural selection because culture is beneficial. Maybe, maybe not. They've taught monkeys with a lot of effort. They taught monkeys how to use money as like abstract money. And apparently what happened was prostitution at that point. But like the idea that you can teach a group of monkeys how to use money, like abstract stores of value, means that like the monkeys can do it. It's just very hard for them. But like, yeah, maybe there is some special psychological mechanisms, but like, yeah. Lumen says, yeah, I also hate these kind of arguments. Feels like a totally unjustified leap from empirical model to ontological claim. Yeah, this is not high-end philosophy. Now, it doesn't make these people wrong, but like this is not like how a philosopher would go about arguing for this stuff. Monkeys do have an innate sense of fairness. I wish people had a better sense of fairness. I think kids are supposed to, but we kind of lose that. Cultural evolution is Darwinian. Okay, so yeah, now what we have the culture is transmitted through like observation and whatever, and we can adapt upon that. And so now we've got the three things: inheritance, we've got variation, and we've got a differential fitness. What's up, Valpo? Yeah, this is a talk given by non-philosophers on a philosophical topic. Thankfully, most of their bullshit is negative. Like they were saying this is like they said some silly stuff, but then they said, well, we're not talking about that. We're saying something else. So like as far as non-philosophers going about philosophy, like this is okay. It's okay. I don't know what their conclusion is. We're getting, well, we last few pages, but we'll see. How you doing, Valpo? Cultural evolution is Darwinian. Now let us consider what these facts imply for a theory of culture. Consider a population of individuals who are culturally interconnected. They speak dialects of a single language, use similar technology, share relatively similar beliefs about the world, and have similar moral values. People in this population think, behave differently from other peoples, in part because they have different culturally transmitted information stored in their brains. Next, consider the descendants of this population, say 100 years later. The culture of the descent population will be similar in many ways to that of their predecessors. Their language will be similar. They may often use similar technology, have similar beliefs about the world, and subscribe to similar moral systems. The fact that culture depends on behavior stored in the brains of this population requires us to account for how the information that generates these similarities was transmitted from the brains in the first population to the brains in the second. Of course, there will also be differences between the two populations, sometimes small, sometimes great. Some of these differences will arise because some behaviors are more common in the second population. Excuse me. thesis writing class went okay tonight. Wednesday's your busiest day, though. Yeah. Well, hope you're relaxing now. But thanks for stopping by. Yeah, it's just I was saying at the beginning of stream, it just seems like everyone's going through it like last few weeks. It's getting worse. So hope you can maintain. Where were we? Yeah. So other differences will arise because genuinely new behavior is present, either as a result of borrowing from neighboring populations or genuine innovation. Thus, a complete theory would also have to account for why some forms of cultural information spread and why some forms have diminished and how innovation occurs. Cumulative cultural change requires observational learning. People somehow observe the behavior of others and acquire the information necessary to produce a reasonable facsimile of the same behavior. In any given time period, each person observes only a sample of the people who make up his population. A very small child is exposed mainly to the people in her family, older children exposed to peers and teachers, and adults to yet a wider range of people. We will refer to this group of people as an individual's cultural sample. For most of human history, cultural samples were small, but nowadays they may be immense. Yes, internet. Mercury is in Gatorade. Yes, exactly. That's how things happen. Viper says, how did the information transfer from one generation to the other? Through bad papers, of course. Yeah. I mean, this is what happens. And like I said, for non-philosophers, I think they are doing an okay job. Like, most of the problems in this paper were things that they were criticizing. Now you could say, okay, they strawmanned a bunch of people. Fine. But like, that wasn't the main point of their paper. It's like, yeah. The fact that cultures often persist over time with little change means that the commonness of a behavior in an individual's cultural sample may have a positive effect on the probability that the individual ultimately acquires the cultural information that generates that behavior. Okay, now we're finally getting to like real claims. It's saying basically you learn what the people around you know, and that's what it is. So it's like you are related to the sort of like local population. Such a tendency could arise in several different ways. If observational learning takes the form of approximately unbiased copying, then common behaviors will be more frequent in cultural samples and therefore will be more likely to be copied. It could also be that the psychology of observational learning itself predisposes people to acquire more common behaviors. Finally, it could be that rare behaviors are typically disadvantageous and less likely to be retained as a result of individual learning and experimentation. I mean, this is generally, oh yeah, sure. But like the whole point of learning rare behaviors is what is going to make your life more interesting. Like I'm a very, very strange person. I've learned way more about argumentation and spent more time thinking about argumentation than I probably should have. And so I am very good at argument analysis now. You guys get to be here and listen to me rant about arguments. I don't always know why you're here, but you do. But like this is a very, very like unique behavior. But so the idea that rare behaviors are typically disadvantageous, I don't think that's right. Rare behaviors they're rare for reasons, but like it may be because they are highly specialized, but they may not be disadvantageous. Anyway, it follows that cultural change is a population process. The argument proceeds in several steps. A, to understand how a person behaves, we have to know the nature of the information stored in our brain. B, to understand why people have the beliefs they do, we must know what kinds of behaviors characterize their cultural sample. C, to predict the distribution of cultural samples exist, you must know the cultural composition of the population. D, therefore, to understand how people behave, we must understand why the population has the cultural composition it does. It has history. This is the answer. There's history to the people, and that's what it is. We're done. To learn about arguments, yes. It's abnormal, therefore bad. Yes, exactly, Latvians. Nothing good can come from being a radical wags finger. Yeah. I mean, what's the old adage? Normal people don't like change the world. Like you need like revolutions or like very unusual people. I think it makes sense. Yeah, I mean, it does make sense. The question here is, they did say typically. Yeah, the question is, was it worth saying? It's like, yeah, they're not wrong. That's why I'm saying they didn't do a bad job. The question is, all right, what new have they added, really? It's like, okay, they got history now. You learn about the people's history, and then you find out what the history is, and then you find out how people are going to act now, because it's more likely to be how they act in the past. And it's like, let's just go ask Shane, and Shane will tell us, and then, like, that's going to happen. Change his username to Radical. Shun, yeah. Viper says, if it was, or Maddie Holmes, if Maddie's around. I don't know if Maddie's around. If it was advantageous, and we would have evolved to do it more, but then you get variation that discovers the new advantage. Yeah. And this is the overarching, like, their position here is that the culture sort of transmits these ideas that have kept the culture running for a long time, the people running for a long time in different ways, and then people improve upon that. And there's different ways that this can happen, and then you're going to have, like, cultural, like, clashes on different ways to get things done. But I got rid of my Trotsky beard? I did. Okay. Similarities between descendants and ancestral populations arise because the necessary information has been transmitted from individual to individual through time without significant change. Yeah, so there's heredity but variation, but there is a small variation. It's not radical. Differences occur because some variants have become more common, others have become more rare, and some completely new variants have been introduced. Thus, to account for both continuity and change, we need to understand the population processes by which ideas are transmitted through time. Yeah, and this is exactly what they're doing. They're setting it up to do the exact traditional Darwinian scheme, as I said: inheritance, variation, and then fitness. Like that the variations matter and outcomes. And like I said, this is a known scheme. This has been known since the time of Darwin. This is basically Darwin's scheme. And so there is a bit of worry here that basically this is their conclusion, but they shoehorned it into the Darwinian scheme. That basically this was the whole argument that they set up sort of may have begged the question to get to this, to fit into this Darwinian scheme. We'd have to go back and, like, really look at their presuppositions and the things that they said at the beginning. But, like, I called this at the beginning. This is what they were doing. This is kind of what they said they were doing. And this is where they ended up. Now, the question is, did they beg the question at any point? Maybe. I'm not entirely sure. But, like, this has definitely been planned since the get-go. Stare, Dad, we are not the same. That's funny. Memes may not be replicators. In the extended phenotype, Dawkins argues that the cumulative evolution of complex adaptations requires what he calls replicators, things in the physical world that produce copies of themselves and have the following three additional properties. 1. Fidelity. The copying must be sufficiently accurate that even after a long chain of copies, the replicator remains almost unchanged. Fecundity. At least some varieties of the replicator must be capable of generating more than one copy of themselves. And longevity. Replicators must survive long enough to affect their own rate of replication. So again, this is rate of replication is fitness, fecundity is inheritance, and then fidelity is, well, variation, but like minimal variation. Again, same exact setup. Replicators give rise to cumulative adaptive evolution because replicators are targets of natural selection. And that's what it is. So I was just defining natural selection, and they defined these things to be targets of natural selection. Genes are replicators. They are copied with astounding accuracy. They can spread rapidly, and they persist throughout the lifetime of an organism, directing its machinery of life. Dawkins thinks that beliefs and ideas are also replicators. On the face of it, this is an apt analogy. Beliefs and ideas can be copied from one mind to another, spreading through a population, controlling the behaviors of people who hold them. But there are reasons to doubt that beliefs and skills are replicators, at least in the same sense that genes are. Unlike genes, ideas are not transmitted intact from one brain to another. Instead, the information in one brain generates some behavior, somebody else observes this behavior, and then somehow creates the information necessary to generate very similar behavior. The problem is that there is no guarantee that the information in the second brain is the same as the first. For any phenotypic performance, there are potentially an infinite number of rules that will generate that performance. Memes will be transmitted from brain to brain only if most people induce a unique rule from a given phenotypic performance. While this may often be the case, it is also plausible that genetic, cultural, or different developmental differences among people may cause them to infer different memes from the same overt behavior. To the extent that these differences shape future cultural change, the replicator model captures only part of cultural evolution. Yeah, feedback, chocolate mints. Yeah, there's definitely a feedback thing. Also, I mean, with the online memes, of course, the fidelity is much better. Although enhanced JPEG is a meme unto itself. Like, how JPEG did you make your meme? The generativist model of phonological change illustrates the problem. According to the generativist school of linguistics, individual pronunciation is governed by a complex set of rules that take as input the desired sequence of words and produce as output the sequence of sounds that will be produced. Enhance. Generativists also believe that as adults, people can modify their pronunciation only by adding new rules and act at the end of the chain of existing rules. Yeah, for people who know, like, I have a redeem, I should, like, modify it. But I have, like, cancel a word, so I think faster than I speak. And so I can actually stop myself from saying a word quite often because I will be thinking, realize what I'm going to say, and change the word as I'm going. And so I cancel words. And so, like, you can make rules and change how you're acting. You can. I do it. And it's how I do philosophy roulette is I have this, like, I'm reading almost on autopilot, and I'm listening to what I'm saying and thinking about what I'm saying because the reading is kind of on autopilot. So it's like, yeah, you can do stuff and modify it as you're going. Granted, I am a weird person. I know that. Children, on the other hand, are not constrained by the rules used to generate adult speech. Instead, they induce the simplest set of grammatical rules that will account for the performances they hear, and they may be quite different than the rules used by adult speakers. Although the new rules produce the same performance, they can have different structure and therefore allow further changes by rule addition that would not have been possible under the old rules. But Latvian, I can't do prepositions, and I'm not cutting it from the words in the paper. Like, it's not happening. I know. But, like, there's rules about that. Like, I can't, when I'm reading a paper, I can't not say the words in the paper because that would fuck with the paper. Again, I really dislike this, the scientific theory here. Like, they're saying, oh, kids have different rules in their head. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. But I think we don't have a solved theory of, like, language that, like, kids versus adults. So, yeah. The following example from Binan illustrates this phenomenon. In some dialects of English, people pronounce words that begin with WH using what linguists call an unvoiced sound, while they pronounce words beginning with W using a voiced sound. Unvoiced sounds are produced with the glottis open, resulting in a breathy sound, while voiced sounds are produced with the glottis closed, causing a resonant tone. People who speak such dialects must have mental representations of the two sounds and rules to assign them to appropriate words. I have no fucking clue what kind of mental representations people have that would, like, that reference their glottis open or closed. I think this is silly, but, like, you can get the idea. Something else is happening. Now suppose that people who speak such a dialect come into contact with other people who only use voiced W sounds. Further, suppose that this second group of people is more prestigious, and accordingly people in the first group modify their speech so that they too only use voiced Ws. According to the generativists, they will accomplish this change by adding a new rule which says voice all Ws. Voice all unvoiced Ws. So Larry wants to say whether it is better to endure. The part of his brain that takes care of such things looks up the mental representation for each of the words, including whether, which has a unvoiced W because that's the way Larry learned to speak as a child. Then after any other processing for stress or tone, the new rule changes the unvoiced W in whether to a voiced W. So is it whether versus weather? I guess it'd be whether and weather. Yeah. Children learning languages in the next generation never hear an unvoiced W, and according to generativists, they adopt the same underlying representation for whether and weather. Thus, even though there is no difference in the phenotypic performance among the parents and children do not acquire the same memes as their parents. This difference may be important because it will affect further changes. For example, it might make it less likely that the two sounds would split again in the future. Yeah. Yeah. Replicators are not necessarily for cumulative. Yeah. Oh, did you refund the money? But yeah. Okay. Like, it's cool if you did. I think Latvian's cool if you didn't, though. Thank you if you did. Replicators are not necessary for cumulative adaptive evolution. We are also doubtful that replicators are necessary for the cumulative evolution of complex features. Here's an example of a transmission system which does just that. When you speak, the kind of sounds that come up out of your mouth depend on geometry of your vocal tract. For example, the consonant P in spit is created by momentarily bringing your lips together with the glottis open. Narrowing the glottis converts this consonant B as in bib, leaving the glottis open and slightly opening the lips to produce the pf as in German word Apfel. I have no idea how it's said. Linguists have shown that even within a single speech community, individuals vary in the exact geometry of the vocal tract used to produce any given word. Thus, it seems plausible that individuals vary in the culturally acquired rule about how to arrange the inside of the mouth when they are speaking any particular word. See, again, this is like so, like, I don't like, this is so weird, the sort of rule talk and like an acquired rule. Like, how is that? Like, yeah, maybe. It sounds like pornography. Yeah, linguistics is sexy, isn't it? Yeah. I mean, this is like ASMR stream now. Languages vary in the sound used, and this variation can be very long-lived. For example, in dialects spoken in the northwest of Germany, P is substituted for P in Apfel in many similar words. The difference arose around 500 AD and has persisted ever since. So, how are different rules governing speech production transmitted from generation to generation? Consider two models. First, suppose that each child learning language is exposed to the speech of a number of adults. These adults vary in the way that they produce the PF sound in Apfel. Each child figures out how she would need to position her tongue to produce the same PF sound as each adult model, and then she adopts one of these as her own rule. Here, a mental rule that governs speech production is transmitted from one individual to another. Down, Ra, down. The mental rule is a replicator. It clearly has fidelity. It has longevity because it potentially persists for generations, and it would have fecundity if the rule was more attractive than competing rules. And because it is a replicator, it can evolve. Now consider a second model. As before, children are exposed to each speech of a number of adults who vary in the way they pronounce PF. Each child unconsciously computes the average of all pronunciations that he hears and adopts the tongue position that produces approximate average. Yeah, you can see this is why people moved away from the stuff. You think anyone is calculating in their head the sound. Like, they're not. They're making the sound and like adjusting heuristically maybe about how to modify sounds. But they're not calculating an average, please. Here, mental rules are not transferred from one brain to another. The child may adopt a rule that is unlike any of the rules in the brains of its models. The rules memes, see, now they're just jumping into it. There's memes. They're calling it memes now. See, what different color? That better? It's all pink at the moment. Yeah. The rules memes in particular brains do not replicate because no rule is copied faithfully. The phonological system can nonetheless evolve in a quite Darwinian way. More attractive forms of pronunciation can increase if they have a disproportionate effect on the average. Rules affecting different aspects of pronunciation can recombine and thus lead to the cumulative evolution of complex phonological rules. It is true that the act of averaging will tend to decrease the amount of variation in the population each generation. However, phenotypic performance will vary as results of age, social context, vocal tract, anatomy, and so on. Learners will often misperceive a performance. These sorts of errors in transmission will keep pumping variation into a population as blending bleeds it away. In fact, averaging might be necessary to prevent high noise level from injecting too much variation into the population. All right, there is something to be said here. So there is, of course, a homogenization of like American English with like radio and TV. So people hear a speech on TV, and that can average stuff out. This old theory caused a major problem for Darwin, though, because back in the day before genetics, how were good genes supposed to survive? Because if they're the best genes, won't they get sort of degraded by all the weaker genes? this is one of the most racist things you will ever be able to read, because someone wrote a letter about how Darwin's theory failed because like the superior white man, if went to like an island of like black people, their whiteness would just be degraded into black, and it's just like this racist fucking thing. But it did show a weakness in Darwin's theory, which was solved by genetics, because you have like dominant and recessive genes, and so even though you were on like so a gene that was actually good doesn't get like averaged out. Latvian says, does the author say it's a lucid calculation or just describing the process? It's lucidity to the person affected not being in question. I don't think the author has any fucking clue what's going on here. I think they're just like talking about theories here that they kind of been like making up, but they clearly don't know the history of this, because like I said, if you knew this like super racist argument against Darwin, you'd realize that that is exactly what they're saying here, and there's like, you know, ways against this, there's like ways around this. So they're just, you know, they're coming up with like, you know, counter examples, and good on them for coming up with this idea that like things do get homogenized over time. And like I said, this is kind of obvious from the like TV and radio nowadays does make a kind of standard American English. Koss hates Nazis. I hate Nazis so much. I went to your local synagogue today, try to get people to help me educate people on why Nazis are monsters. I mean, teaching people history and why Nazis suck is a good thing to do. There are still other possibilities that differ even more radically from the replicator model. For example, a propensity to imitate the common type in the population can be coupled with high rates of individual learning to create a model in which there is little heritable variation at the individual level, but substantial heritability of group variations. In such a model, the cumulative evolution of adaptive complexity can occur rapidly through selective processes that act at the group level. Similarly, in recent models of the evolution of social institutions, there is no cultural transmission at the individual level. Although individuals simply acquire the best response to their social environment by trial and error learning, the structure of social interactions creates persistent heritable variations at the group level. Yeah, see, this is what I mean. There's a bunch of theories in the area. Pick one. Doesn't really matter. They don't care either is the issue. The whole point is that they're trying to throw enough stuff at the wall that they're going to say, this should stick. So memes do evolve, or culture does evolve like a meme through evolution. Okay? That's the whole point here. Yeah, and they know this. Next line is, we do not understand in detail how culture is stored and transmitted, so we do not know whether memes are replicators or not. If the application of Darwinian thinking to understanding cultural change depended on the existence of replicators, we would be in trouble. Fortunately, memes need not be close analogs to genes. They must be gene-like to the extent that they are somehow capable of carrying the cultural information necessary to give rise to the cumulative evolution of complex cultural patterns that differentiate human groups. They exhibit the essential Darwinian properties of fidelity, fecundity, and longevity, but as the example of phonemes shows, this can be accomplished by a most ungene-like, replicatorless process of error-prone phenotypic imitation. All that is really required is that culture constitutes a system of maintaining heritable variation. Darwinian models are useful. Science on the frontier often has an anarchic, nervy flavor because it must deal with multiple uncertainties. Of course, we'd be better off knowing exactly what memes are. Papering over the uncertainties of how culture is stored and transmitted no doubt leads to errors and conceals areas of fruitful inquiry. But as the psychologists explore one part of the frontier, the evolutionists should probe others. Studying the population properties of cultural information has lots of implications for human cognitive psychology and vice versa. You know, what do you think the LLMs are here? The LLMs are basically very similar to like what they're talking about. They're just giant repositories of like human text that they are churning through to predict what comes next. And this is kind of like a repository of cultural information stored in predictive text. That's basically what's going on these sorts of things. So it's like, and frankly, it was raised on fucking Reddit, so it is full of memes anyway. So yeah, I did play around with some of the AIs a while back and asked it for ranking of video games. And if you ask in different languages, the ranking order came out different. It was like still the same top 10 or just about, but the ordering was different. And so you wonder, did the people in France, if you ask in French, what's like the best video games, did they have a different preference due to their cultural history? And I think the answer is yes. Now, I don't know what's going on in the LLMs, but the rankings were slightly different. And so it's like, it's not like, this sort of cultural information can be stored as such is not a crazy thought. Okay. Yeah. I thought it was interesting, Luminance. All right. For example, when a child has the chance to copy the behavior of several different people, does she choose a single model for a given discrete cultural attribute? Or does she average in some other way combine the attributes of alternative models? The minute you try to build a population model of culture, you see that this question is crucial. However, despite conducting thousands of experiments in social learning, psychologists apparently have never thought to answer this question. Yeah, because your question's got weird fucking philosophy behind it, friends. Just as at a four-way stop, it makes no sense for everyone to wait for everyone else. Watch what the other drivers are doing, certainly, but go whenever the road ahead is clear, even though it may turn out to be a dead end. Not reconciled. This chocolate. K-Par says, I feel like they'd be stored in social institutions as well, like a bureaucracy reproduces itself regardless of the officer. Yeah, we were talking about that earlier, that there's definitely artifacts and institutions would count along those lines. The people here were saying, look, yes, there are going to be artifacts, and this is a paper from the 90s. So extended mind stuff was still in its infancy, basically. And so they kind of were like, yeah, we know there's other stuff, but we're just going to talk about basically the stuff that gets transmitted through speech and behavior. So, yeah. Many social sciences have reacted to the advent of Darwinian models of culture with palpable distaste, while others have embraced the idea with enthusiasm. Much of this variation can be explained by people's feelings about the current balkanization of the social sciences. The world of social science is divided into self-sufficient ethnies, like anthropology and economics, that are content to follow the questions and presuppositions that govern their discipline. The inhabitants of this world regard other disciplines with a mixture of fear and contempt, and take little interest in what they have to say about questions of mutual interest. Clearly, this is not a satisfactory state of affairs. We believe that Darwinian models can help rectify this problem. Disciplines like economics, psychology, and evolutionary biology take the individual as the fundamental unit of analysis. These disciplines differ about how to model the individual and her psychology, but because they have the same fundamental structure, there has been much substantive interaction between them. Nowadays, many economists and psychologists work closely together, and a rich new body of work, often called behavioral economics, has rapidly become mature enough to be applied to important practical problems, such as the effect of retirement accounts on natural savings rates. In the same way, economists and evolutionary biologists have found it relatively easy to work together on evolutionary models of social behavior, a rapidly growing field in both disciplines. Other disciplines like cultural anthropology and sociology emphasize the role of culture and social institutions in shaping behavior, and researchers in sociology, anthropology, and history find interactions relatively comfortable. Bridging the gap between the individual and cultural disciplines has proved much more difficult. Darwinian models are useful precisely because they all point something's wrong here. Darwinian models are useful precisely because they present a point of view to be expressed within a single theoretical framework in which neither individual nor culture is paramount. In population-based models, culture and social institutions arise from the interaction of individuals whose psychology has been shaped by their social milieu. Energy says, the problem with economics is that it's hard, if not impossible, to create a model for human behavior at a macro scale, given free will, in your opinion. Yeah, I mean, nothing is a solved science here. Nothing at all. So we're not really talking about like solving economics. The question is, can these disciplines talk between each other? And the problem is the fundamental unit is different. Some people talk at the population level, some people talk at the individual level, and it's sort of like split into two silos. All the different disciplines that speak at the individual level can talk to each other, and all the people at the group or population level talk to each other, and these people think they're jumping the gap between the two. I don't see how they're jumping the gap at all, frankly, because they have been cheering the population level analysis this whole time, and they have not been talking about the individual. So I don't know what they think they're claiming here. Laughing Jesus says, laughing my ass off, not the sociologists in chat making their exact point about how they identify the transmission institutions as well. Yeah. Cliff, what's up? Yeah. Ohio, they allow. Okay. Yeah, so, well, this is what happens. This is, again, this was a talk they gave, and who knows what copy of the talk got put up on the website. So, a few typos here. Nothing too terrible, really. To see how useful population-based models can be. Okay, so they're really just doing rah for population and saying all the individual level sciences should do more population stuff. Okay. To see how useful population-based models can be, or modes can be, consider the problem of human cooperation. There's no coherent explanation for the vast scale of cooperation in contemporary human societies, or why the scale of cooperation has increased many thousandfold over the last 10,000 years. Models in economics and evolutionary biology predict that cooperation should be limited to small groups of relatives and reciprocators. Many theories in anthropology simply assume, often implicitly, that cooperative societies are possible and that culturally transmitted beliefs in social institutions serve the interests of social groups, but no attempt is made to reconcile this assumption with the fact that people are at least partly self-interested. Darwinian models provide one cogent mechanism to explain human cooperation by identifying the conditions under which groups will come to vary culturally and predicting when such variation will lead to the spread of culturally transmitted beliefs that support large-scale cooperation. In such models, the effect of different culturally transmitted beliefs on group prestige and group survival shapes the kind of beliefs that survive and spread, which in turn affects what people want and what they believe, and therefore their behavior. Other recent work on the evolution of institutions make us optimistic that Darwinian models may have widespread utility. I mean, this is fair. There's like ideas that cultural institutions and ideas support group dynamics and cohesion. Sure. But like they're saying, oh yeah, well, this is Darwinianly supported. Okay, dude, maybe. But yeah. Exactly, Latin Jesus. Porque no los dos? Population thinking is also useful because it offers a way to build mathematical theory of human behavior that captures the important role of culture in human affairs. Mathematical theory is the great advantage of allowing conclusions to be reliably deduced from assumptions. Yeah, you can deduce conclusions, but that don't mean they're good. But yeah, that's what math does. Experience in economics and evolutionary biology also suggests that it leads to a kind of clear understanding that is difficult to achieve with verbal reasoning alone. Of course, there is also a cost. Mathematical theory is necessarily based on simplified models. However, the combination of mathematical and verbal reasoning is superior to either alone. Sure. Memes are not a universal acid, but they are a better mousetrap. Population modeling of culture offers social science, useful conceptual tools, and a handy mathematical machinery that will help solve important, long-standing problems. It is not a substitute for rational actor models or careful historical analysis, but it can be an invaluable complement to all these forms of analysis that will enrich the social sciences. Hooray! Okay. So now, if you're in chat, we rate the paper. Feel free to use some of the emotes you see in chat below me. If you don't see them in your chat, you see a text. These are better TTV emotes, so they're available to everyone with an extension. And so, if you thought this paper gave you some fine ideas, you give it a brain dance. Spelling and capitalization do count. If you thought it talked about existential or artistic drama, give it a Nog Scream. Deep or ancient ideas, you give it an Ouroboros, Nog Oro. Slicing and dicing arguments for a Nog Knife. Navel gazing only for academics, a Nog Navel. Nog Turd for all style, no substance, still poop underneath. And Nog Grapes for big claims that shrivel up. You can also use the global vote yay and vote nay of Twitch, and my vote meh. Now, I do calculate an overall score. Anything in the green makes the overall score go up. Anything in the red makes it go down, and the vote meh actually makes it go to the middle. Laughing Jesus gave it a grapes and a meh. Laughing Now gave it a grapes and a meh. Vipers agrees a grapes and a meh. Yeah, I am very much in agreement with that sort of rating. Cost says I was unable to pay attention. That's fine. Keypart says gave it a double meh and a turd. I was going to make a joke earlier about cunning linguist, but I held my tongue. With what did you hold your tongue, Va? but like I was expecting it to be good, so no, yeah. I know it was well titled. It's got a good concept, but I'm with the grapes here. It really didn't hold up to the promise of what it said. I thought it's not wrong in what it said, but I don't think it did a whole lot either. It was kind of cheering and like beating the drum for a little bit of population level analysis, but that isn't like a huge conclusion there. So yeah, I'm with chat on this one. Let's see. Vote meh and grapes, I think is right. One of the greatest moments I had on Twitch was a very long time ago. So someone had enabled TTS for basically all chat. So they were this my old buddy Bubba Bloop in the Minesweeper community. He put TTS on everything because I think he was standing away from the computer. He would like work out, like he would like lift weights, like legit like weights, and then like play Minesweeper. So he wasn't always at the computer. So he was hearing this, and I used the cunning linguist or whatever thing, but it was being read out loud, and in context there was like about like it was funny, and in context he couldn't explain because he kept his stream family friendly, so he couldn't explain what's happening, but he lost his mind because I got like, not only was it relevant to the chat, not only like was it like being read out loud and I was like saying something like self-referential at the time, he couldn't explain it, and so there was like 3 levels of joke that he couldn't talk about all at once. Are you usually the one with the emotes that they vote for? Are you usually with that on the emotes that they vote for? Do you mean like, do I usually agree with chat? Quite often we agree. Sometimes we disagree, but like, yeah. Quite often I agree. Did I vote already or no? Thought I was going. Yeah, I voted. Sometimes we disagree, not always. And there are definitely people who have different opinions. So like we've got some continentals in chat. So if we read like heavy analytic stuff, they don't always like it, or if we read continental stuff, they do like it more. So there are definitely topics and authors that get voted on differently, and so like some people are more science oriented in chat and they like the more sciencey stuff, and not everyone does. So it's really topic, but we've come, because people have been around a long time, I think we've come to like sort of an understanding about like some argumentation is just not as good. Yeah, Latvian says, yeah, when we read the mushy French shit, I'm going to be all over it. Yeah, exactly. So, and defend it. Yeah, so we've got like people who like the mushy French philosophy, and then we've got people that are way more science oriented. We've got like people who like philosophy of language here, did like work in linguistics. So like, yeah. All right, anyone else want to get their rating in? I don't have a whole lot to say about this paper because like I think we said it along the way, but 60 seconds left. If you want to get your rating in, go right ahead. Please do